You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. Welcome to Smarter Podcasting with me, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. The thing with podcasting is there has always been quite a low barrier to entry, for myself included. When I first started, you can just buy a microphone, like you said, put it down in front of you.
It's just going to pick me up instead of the world. Yeah. My dog's barking, my kid's screaming. Yeah, I can hear it better in my headphones right now. That's just crazy. Yeah, you're right. 100%.
I've been podcasting since 2019. I created a Vietnam podcast, which is now in the top 10% of podcasts worldwide. I created Did That Really Happen, a comedy podcast, because I'm also a comedian. And I now work with podcasters across the world to help them build their audience and connect with their community. Now, I don't promise anybody that I work with that I'm going to help them quit their day job or make $1 million or get 1 million listeners. But what I do promise is that I will help them with the audio quality of their podcast, because I think quality audio is more important than quality content. A listener will turn off immediately to poor quality audio. So I want to help podcasters create the best sounding podcast that they can with the budget that they have. So now I've started to do podcast audits. I will talk to another podcaster after listening to their episode and give them my tips and feedback to help them improve the quality of their podcast. So my guest today is an entrepreneur, childbirth educator, postpartum doula, and we'll find out what a doula is shortly, and a sex coach as well. She is the co-host of the Birth Education Center podcast, and my guest today is Keir Messer. Thank you very much for letting me audit your podcast, Keir.
Thank you, Neil. I will take all the tips you have.
So what is your podcast all about?
Oh, big question. It's about advocacy. It's about standing up for yourself. It's about understanding what you want for the birth of your baby. And since you're paying the bill, asking for what you want and going with the flow as your birth comes into play.
First of all, I have some questions for you. What equipment are you using to record your podcast?
That's something I did invest some money in. So my camera is a Nexico 4K camera, which I don't always record in 4K, but I want the option as technology increases. My microphone is a Shure MV7 microphone, which I love. It has a lot of dials on it, and I can get really close to it and not have a lot of bounce back. And I just have a regular stand for that. I don't have room for a boom mic stand right now. I kept tripping over it, so I gave that away. And what else? My co-host has a Samsung or a Samson Q2V or something like that microphone. And they're just USB mics, and headphones are just plain and simple. I ordered some new ones recently, but yeah, that's what we're using.
Nice. So you got some really good equipment then to start off with. So that's amazing. Do you know your mic's a condenser or a dynamic microphone?
Dynamics. They're both dynamics, which I had to do a lot of research to understand what that was. I've researched a ton to understand all your language that you guys have with this podcasting.
So I'm going to test you. What is a dynamic microphone?
It means that it's catching me really close and it's hopefully not picking up the whole room. Is that right?
That is exactly right. Yeah. And I'm noticing on the video, though, I can't see it right now. So how far away are you from it?
It's right here. So it's about a foot away. When it's too close to me, I feel claustrophobic. And so I've tested it out with a couple of audio friends to where I can have it just outside of camera reach without me being right on top of it. I figure if I'm ever going to do some sexy ASMR, then I can be right on top of it. But for now, I'm not doing that.
All right. And then what do you use to edit your podcast?
Descript, which is why I called you, because I love that program. Sometimes for my little bits, I'll use CapCut. I'm really fast at CapCut. I started out with doing video, so I'm pretty confident with that for Instagram and TikTok. But as far as my big long ones that I'm going to start doing for YouTube, etc., and the podcast, I want to be able to do that in Descript because it's such a fantastic program.
Yeah, I'm all about Descript. It's incredible. I've been using it for a few years now, and there's always challenges with it, but it's made podcasting so much easier, so much fun. It's great program. I know we talked a little bit about your podcast, but what is your specific podcast niche?
Birth workers, so birth workers and parents, people that are thinking of getting pregnant, so the fertility journey, because there's a lot to understand before you even get pregnant and how to set your insurance up and all of that kind of stuff, depending on what kind of birth you're looking for. And then birth workers, how to support families with the information that we have as birth educators. So that's kind of our niche. And since there's a spiritual element to it, I know I'm going to get a lot of spiritual workers, if that makes sense, because it's a global theme with birth. Birth's a very sacred event, and a lot of times it's so commercial that we're only thinking about what clothes we're buying for our pregnant bellies and what we're going to look at on Instagram, but there's way more to bringing a human into the world, so there's an extra level of that with our birth education.
Nice. And then what makes your podcast different than the other 250,000 podcasts published every week?
Not one thing. No. I think it's the spiritual element of birth. I think we talk a lot about the consciousness of what your baby is experiencing through the whole thing, because it's a tiny human that's growing inside you as well as coming into the world. So how they birth matters. And we really don't care if it's medicated, not medicated, if it's a cesarean, a natural birth. It's still the birth of your baby, and it still sets their patterns. So I think that's the difference. We're not so hard on it's all a natural birth and these are our only birth stories, or it's all cesarean births. It's birth. And we're not tied to how you birth. We want you to have all of your options so that you can make conscious choices for your baby.
And so what is the goal of your podcast?
I think so people have education. They understand what they're saying yes to, what they're saying no to, because in our system, we just say yes and agree because we always have this kind of dead baby card hanging over our head. Like, well, if you do that, your baby could die. And we get coerced into a lot of decisions that are pretty heavily swayed one way, which is how the provider feels the most safe, instead of what's actually happening in our bodies and what might be the safest for us. So it's a lot about consent, a lot about advocacy, and a lot about finding your voice, because in America, it is very swayed to the medical profession, how they make money, and how your provider feels the safest and the least likely to get sued, which is welcome to America. That is, I know, that's welcome to America. How do we sue? We sue OBs more than anybody else in this state, in this country. So yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I feel like you might have answered my next question, but see if you have a different answer for it. Why should someone listen to your podcast?
I think it's a different take on birth. It can be fun and lighthearted. We really want you to have a positive birth experience. And that means getting educated, because if you go in with no education, thinking someone else is going to make all your decisions, that's exactly what you're going to get. And it might be a lot more birth trauma than you could have had if you'd actually found out what your fears are and solved those problems before you walked into this beautiful, magnificent experience that's literally going to change your life and the life of your baby. So there's a lot to birth, and I think we just need to kind of overcome our fear and walk into it with open eyes.
And final question before we get into the audit. What lessons or value do you want a listener to come away with at the end of each episode?
Oh, that they can do it. Like, their body was set up to succeed, not to fail. And once they understand how the birth process works and how to work with it, it can be awesome.
Perfect. All right, so let's get into your podcast. So you're only 5 episodes in so far, but your YouTube channel has been about for a while, and I noticed. And then you took a break for the pandemic, I heard.
Didn't we all take a break for the pandemic? Being a single mom with a handicapped child and having no childcare, that was a very tough year. And my business, all my partners were at home with their kids, and it was pure chaos. So we were trying to teach online, create online with kids in our backgrounds, and it was, wow, was it hard. So yeah, we took a break for that part, and we'd actually started a podcast in 2019 with one mic, one USB, and it was, oh, the recordings were so bad. And as you know, in 2020, things kind of up leveled, and they just were too unprofessional to put out. So I'm glad that we took a step back and started the creative process, and I really delved back into the research. And my goal, yes, is to have video podcasts, but I want to make sure I've got the audio down pat first, because you're right. If it sounds terrible, I won't even listen to it. So I want to make sure that I know what I'm doing first before I move on with, you can always add more, but let's perfect what I've got. So I'm excited that you're going to critique this. And then I'm also nervous.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you recognize that and that up leveling. And yeah, I think now the thing with podcasting is there has always been quite a low barrier to entry for myself included. When I first started, you can just buy a microphone, like you said, put it down in front of you. I know somebody who's recorded, I think, over 400 episodes just using his phone. The quality was awful, like really, really bad. And I tried to help him improve it, and he did a little bit, but then that is how low the barrier to entry is with podcasting. You know, you can do Spotify for podcasters for free. You can record and upload immediately. But I think we're way, way past that now of like the kind of that style of podcasting. Now people expect more. The podcast I listen to are so well produced by studios like Wondery and NBC, and you have investigative podcasts that take a year to make. And so I think the listener expects a lot more. So it doesn't mean that there's not a place for indie podcasts and people like you and myself and other podcasters that don't have massive budgets, and there is still a low barrier to entry, but the cost of equipment has come down. You can get a decent microphone for as little as $100. You can still use Spotify for podcasters. But the fact that you've leveled up from that original podcast that you just said you did is already amazing. And so I have to say, in 5 episodes in, I think your podcast is really great. Like I was really, really impressed. So well done on that. You can tell you've done a lot of research. Like you just said you'd done some research there. And so first of all, I'll just start with the music. Like I absolutely love the music. I think it's absolutely great. You get the music just for 2 seconds and then you start talking. So I think possibly the music could be slightly longer, anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds, but it's really a personal call. 2 seconds can be enough if you just want to get into it. But I think you could extend it just by those, even just 3 seconds, just to give people a chance to, because the music's great. So give them a chance to kind of listen to it, would be good. But the biggest thing I noticed with the music, and you use the script, so I would make sure the volume goes down on the music once you start talking, because the music was a little bit over empowering.
Okay.
And I don't know, have you used something called ducking?
I have before, and I don't know, because my music, I actually had a professional mix it for me because I was afraid of doing what you just said. So isn't that funny? But yeah, so I have used it before, and I will probably use it as I'm doing my own editing. So can you tell me a little bit more about it?
I wanted to share with you about one of my favorite affiliate partners, and that is Fiverr. I've been using Fiverr for years for everything from ordering YouTube thumbnails to keyword research, writing podcast articles, even to Canva designs and thumbnails and more. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a podcaster, or anyone in between, Fiverr has got you covered. It really is the go-to platform if you want to find freelancers offering a massive range of services to help you on any project. Maybe you need a stunning new logo or just a short animation. Whatever you need, you can find it on Fiverr. What I love the most is how easy Fiverr makes it to connect with talented freelancers from around the world, all at prices that will fit whatever your budget is. Plus, with Fiverr's secure payment system, you can trust that your transactions are safe and secure. No dodgy people you meet on Facebook groups that disappear with your money and never give you what you want. What, that's only happened to me? As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you use the link and at no extra cost to you. As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you click my link and you buy something, all at no extra cost to you. And best of all, you will be directly supporting the making of this podcast that you're listening to for free, but it is not free to make. So why we head over to somewhere that you've probably never been before. It's called the show notes. So whatever app you're listening in, if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything at all, head to the show notes, click on my special link, and then you can browse thousands of gigs ready to help you with your next project. So you were afraid of ducking. Just making sure you understood I said ducking.
Yes. In my profession, there are words that match that. But yes, I did hear that. Correct.
So that intro you had, so I love that it's like a boilerplate intro and the outro as well. So is that already pre-made with the music? Sorry, with the music and the audio together?
Yes.
You don't add that yourself. So I would go back to your it's so funny because I don't want to talk down or bad of people, but I do work with some people that work with quote unquote professional people for video, or like I was working with a client recently and he's like, I did this video with a professional videographer, but the sound is terrible. Can you help improve the sound? So sometimes I think because we think we work with somebody who's professional, we assume it's going to be great. And
I know it's going to be better than I do it. So
not always, though, not always. So I would go back though to that person and ask to separate those two files, the audio, the speaking part and the music. And then you can create that boilerplate again in Descript. So you go into something called Dynamic, which you've probably seen on the right-hand side next to Studio Sound, and you choose ducking. And I used to put it at 25%, which meant it kind of was a nice balance between the sound of the music and the volume of your voice. But, you know, as Descript updates things all the time, they've updated it, and the default is 10%, and that now seems to be the right volume. So when you do it, set it at 10%, which then the music will go down so you can still hear it in the background, but it doesn't overpower your voice, and you ultimately want to hear what you're saying. So that was my biggest tip with the intro. And then it was the same with the outro. Like the outro started and the music was like really loud, and it was kind of overpowered your voice and what you were saying. And then on episode 4, I noticed that there wasn't really any gap at all between the end of the episode and the outro. So the episode finished and then the outro started right away. So I would just add a, like 3 to 5 second gap clip with that. You have the start of the music. And that might be actually, now that you've told me that it's the music and the voice are already put together. If you have them separated, you can have the music gently fade in for 2 or 3 seconds, have a bit of a gap, and then the outro, the spoken part of the outro.
And I do have them separate. I have everything separate just in case. So I've got them melded, and then I've also got separate. So, and I've thought about that too. Like, I like when people, it starts to blend in and stuff like that. And I know every episode is different, so I need to pay closer attention to that. So thank you for that.
No problem. And then, and then for the intro itself, like what you say, I think it's absolutely great. And when you said there at the beginning about how you've done a lot of research, and you can really tell because it really follows what I would advise to people. You say what the podcast is, who you are, what value the listener will get from the show. And then the first line, once you finish that boilerplate intro and you start the episode, you immediately explain what the upcoming episode is about. So I think that's great.
Lots of research. I've listened to so many people's podcasts and watched so many tutorials, and because everybody else knows best. They've already done it. So why would I reinvent the wheel and say, I'm going to totally make this perfect? I'm like, it's going to be a work in progress. I know that going into it.
The two main ones that I follow is Grow the Show podcast with Kevin Schmidlin. Have you heard that one? I get a lot of my tips from there. He's a bit of an expert as well, but again, he's just learned by doing, like everyone else. And then the other one is Podcasting Business School, but that's more about how to make money from your podcast, whereas Grow the Show is about how to grow your podcast. And then there's a million other podcasts out there. And then with my podcast, I'm trying to help with the quality of the podcast to make sure, because the number one thing is having a good quality podcast to me anyway. But yeah, the intro's great. The music does fade out nicely, actually, when the episode starts. So once the initial intro finishes, even though the music is quite loud, it does fade out when the episode starts, which is nice. Skipping right to the end to your outro. So I would advise having one clear call to action per episode that you want people to do. What action do you want people to take? So from what I could hear, you had 3, which isn't terrible, but there's just, my advice. So the first one you had was followers on YouTube. So I have a big question about this. You have a podcast listener. Why do you want them to go to your YouTube?
You know, a lot of people have found YouTube, or YouTube has been a big place for discovery for podcasts. So as I researched and talked to people in my industry, where are you finding podcasts? They're like, oh, I see a YouTube short, and I go immediately over there and follow it. And I'm like, I always listen to everything on Spotify, but they're finding it on YouTube, and they're either following it so they know, because they're already getting subscription, tings every time something else comes out on video. So they're even listening to it while they're getting ready in the morning, which I still go to Spotify, but so many of the people in my industry are watching as they're getting ready. So, which I would still watch on Spotify. But yeah, and that I was going to ask you that too, because I know people have clear calls to action. And for me personally, if I like that person, I immediately go follow. And I feel like everyone says you have to like tell people exactly what you want to do. And I'm like, aren't they adults? Won't they do it? And everyone's like, no, they won't. And I do. So I'm wondering, yeah, what do I want them to do? I want them to subscribe? Do I want them to contact me? Do I want them to share it with a friend? Like, what do you think I should ask them for?
Well, going back to the YouTube part, so you're saying about how people discover it on YouTube and then find your podcast. But what you're asking them to do is then go back to YouTube, which is a completely different platform, and you're almost sending listeners from your podcast away. So, for my advice, I just have I have a very strong opinion on keeping podcasts and YouTube separate. And if you're sending them to YouTube and it's the same content on YouTube, then like, why are you sending them to YouTube unless there's different content on there? But when I looked on your YouTube, it's the same content, right? So unless you want to lose listeners and send them to and increase your YouTube, but I don't think that's how YouTube works. Like, YouTube will work from SEO. It's how Google ties in. Like, people are going to find it because it comes up like suggested next video, or their algorithm's going to push it. I don't think you need to send listeners away. So if you want to build your listeners, don't send them to YouTube, basically, is my opinion.
So would you suggest go to Spotify or go to Apple Podcasts, or like a specific one, or just generic, follow us where you listen to your podcasts?
Well, that's what I was going to say. The next call to action you have is follow us on all the places. What are the places was my next question. So where do you want people to follow you? But I'm also 100% on with you on this one. And I've done a bit of research on this. I don't know if we do need to say, hey, follow and subscribe, turn on notifications, because people are adults. And I personally have never followed or subscribed because somebody says that. I know I do it on my podcast, but I actually say like, hey, it's a massive cliche, but follow and subscribe, turn on your notifications. I'm only doing this because everyone else does it. But what I've read and what I agree with is it's all about producing great value quality content. And if people like it, they're going to follow, subscribe, turn on the notifications.
I agree.
Anyway. So I don't think we need to do it. And I do it, but I do kind of do it in a jokey manner because I'm still on the fence. But I do think we don't need to do it because it's all about creating great content. So if you want people to follow you on all the places, where do you want them to follow you? And again, it's always about choosing one thing. Where's your biggest following? Is it Facebook? Do you have a Facebook group? Do you have an Instagram page? Is it LinkedIn? Is it TikTok? Where do you want people to follow you? And then give that as a specific call to action, like follow us here. And then your third call to action is go to our website. And again, it needs a bit more like why go to your website? What is it in relation to that in that episode? So that's why I'd have a more specific call to action. If your episode is about, I don't want to say because I can't think exactly what your episodes are all about. Induction was the one I just listened to. If your episode is about inducing, which is quite interesting because my sister just had a baby and she was induced, send them to a webpage about induction. Okay. Tell them specifically where to go. And then that's what I also noticed in the show notes as well. Your show notes are great. Like, they really describe the episode, but they have so many call to actions. Like, if I just look right here, you got Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. So that's 5. Then for your online course, 6, Induction 101, 7, Mental Health, 8, Newborn Podcast Procedures, 9, 10, 11, 12 links on there. And so
once again, more research, like 6 or 7 places said have your everything that they can find so they can quickly scan and go right to it. to make it easy for them, like one click. And I'm like, okay, I'll just list it.
Paul, I mean, again, and I'm just one other opinion. So if that's what the research says, I would mostly have that one call to action and have that link at the top anyway, at the very least. And then you can also have embedded links or like hyperlinks, because right now yours are like the text, then a big long link. So you can hyperlink it so it's not so messy and it's a bit clearer, and you can kind of tidy it up. So you still have many links, but it's just a bit tidier. That's just my opinion on that. So we're going all the way back. So that's just the branding. Oh yeah, and then I absolutely love the branding. I love the colors and the font. But I have a question. Do you think that you need the text on the podcast episode artwork? Because you have episode 003, for example, then you have your logo in the top left, and then not very big font writing, not very, very big font. It will say like Matt and Janet's birth story with their picture underneath.
And
So
I was going to ask
what
you
do you
that.
think about?
I was going to ask you that because once again, they want your branding on and then 3 words, big text. And I was like, but my logo, like to me, it's like, I'll just put the Lotus episode 4 and then 3 words in the picture. Because I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like you can't see it. Like when I'm looking at Spotify, I can't see Birth Education Center on there. How do I separate it? They've already found the actual podcast. Do I need to put the logo on it? So yeah, that was one of my questions.
Yeah, so I went and looked on my phone, just like you said, on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And so about 80% of podcast listeners use a mobile phone to listen. I checked one of my podcasts, my main one, it's 84%.
Mm-hmm.
So the advice that I follow now is I just have the picture. So I would consider just removing all text and just have the image fill the whole square, because you can already see the episode title, obviously, when you look on your phone. And then the top of the show notes, so you can see what the episode is about. And then obviously people like people, so when they see the full image of the person, they're like, oh well, that's the episode title, it's about this, and that's the people that it's about. So I want to look at that. So that would be just, again, it's splitting hairs, and I like to think of things as like marginal gains. I'm not here to, it's not going to suddenly you're going to get 1 million downloads because you've changed the font.
Oh, but I might.
Yeah, you never know exactly. So my advice would be remove all text, remove your logo, remove all text basically, and just have the picture, because people can see all that other information you have anyway. And yeah, on your phone, it's so small. Now, my next question is, what research have you done, and why have you listed the episode numbers in the title?
Well, I don't on Apple because I know Apple doesn't like it. And a lot of times, from what I've researched, because everyone has different opinions about it, but most often they said put the title number, because you're going to say in episode 5, if you're sending somebody back, so say I'm on episode 20 and I say in episode 4, and then they can quickly see it in the title. Without just, because if they're scrolling through, right, they're looking for a picture or they're looking for a number. So that's why I put 004 or whatever in the title, in case I reference back, hey, we've already had this person on, go back to podcast 2, and to hear that full episode. So still, I would love an opinion on that.
Well, I've read that advice as well. And so the main thing on that is, so when you're doing a future episode, are you going to remember the episode that you're referencing was episode 2, when you might be up to episode 150 by this point? Because that's what we really want to aim for, is you're going to be doing over 100 episodes, over 200, 300, 400. Like you want to be aiming like long term. So when you get to episode 322, are you going to remember like, hey, go back to episode 56 and check this out?
I'm kind of detail oriented, so I bet you I could do it.
Yeah.
At least,
you maybe could.
At least with research, I could do it. Not off the top of my head.
Well, I did talk to somebody else about this, and they were like, yeah, I mean, so it's more research. So you have to know what you're going to talk about in that episode and then go and research what episode was referenced. So for me, I like to do everything as light as possible. So I probably wouldn't do that. But my main opinion on that is that the only reason that you need numbers, if you're doing like a serial podcast, like a fictional podcast, that listeners need to know that it goes episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they know that they need to listen in order, because obviously on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, you can change the order on the date it was published, or I think maybe alphabetical. I'm not 100% sure. I know you can change it based on date of publication. And sometimes when I listen to story podcasts, which I love, you're like, oh, wait, what episode? I've gotten confused before because I'm like, I don't know which episode comes next. So I think that's the only time you really need episode numbers. The reason as well is, as you know, you really only have a small amount of real estate for your title, and you really need to grab people's attention. They're scrolling down, they need to know what's happening. So to me, it's, and also on Apple Podcasts, they say they show the numbers, but I had a look, I didn't see the numbers. But unless it's sequential, people want to see the title more than the number. I think that's just more important. And then yeah, and like you said with Apple Podcasts, you said that you took the numbers away on Apple Podcasts. I had a look on Apple Podcasts, and your episode 4 still had 004, but nothing else did. But how did you change the titles on just Apple Podcasts? I didn't even know you could do that.
So in Lisbon is my distributor, and Lisbon has, you put your title in, and then there's a separate one for Apple. And so, and for, I now that I think about it, I didn't double check that when I was doing it because I just barely did it. So, because it was late getting onto Apple. So yeah, it will automatically load it into Apple, and then they say make sure you go in and take those numbers out because Apple doesn't like it. So that's why in Lisbon there's 2 places to do it.
I have never used Lisbon. I've used Buzzsprout and a bunch of other ones. But so again, completely personal preference. I would take away the numbers. I think it takes away too much of the real estate. I don't think there's much value in it. And if you do want to reference an episode, you could always just reference the title and the date. Like if you're going to go ahead and do the research to find out which episode you're going to refer to, you can go back to September 12th and the episode's called this. But again, it's completely up to you. I know many podcasters do it. I know Pat Flynn does it, but he has a lot of people on his team who'll be like, go back to episode 257.
Right.
And yeah, are you going to do that? Are you going to do that though? I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know. I'm gonna look at that because it might save a step in a brain power. So I'll talk to my co-host and see why we would want to or not want to. Most of the birth podcasts that we've researched are all numbered. So maybe that's why we just assumed we do it.
Yeah, again, there's no real wrong or right answer, but my feeling is don't have the don't have the episode numbers in it because it just takes up vital real estate in your title that doesn't add that much value. But again, personal preference. So now going back to the podcast. So you have your intro, which I think is great. Bring the music down. But what was really noticeable was the quality of the audio dropped from your boilerplate intro, which was really recorded professionally and you can hear it. And then as soon as the episode starts, it becomes quite echoey and you can hear the room. But now from what you've told me in the beginning, I think I know the reason. But first of all, you used the script already, so I assume that you're using studio sound?
For most of them, yes. Some of them, when I first got started, I had professionals do it. My goal was to have at least 20 done before I started, so I wouldn't give up. So I had the first 7 or 8 done by professionals so that was done, and I could be working on the next ones because I knew I'd be auditing or editing those myself. So yes, we've been trying to figure out why the echo has been happening, and we've been researching and practicing and trying different things because there are some that are exactly that. And it's like, how do we change that? Because I recorded it on the same microphone in the same room. And that's what we haven't been able to figure out.
I think I know exactly what it is, and it's what you told me right in the beginning. It's because you can see my microphone. You should be about a fist away from your mouth. Your microphone. You can probably hear my voice.
Yep.
Way more echoey. So are you able to do that just now? Can we test it? Can you bring it closer? I mean, you've got an amazing microphone.
I know. So yeah, does it sound different even if I have it right here?
Yeah. So try and get it so it's facing like upwards like mine, right? So can you put it in front of you? So it's still not covering your face, but it's about a fist away from your mouth.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to either get a lower thing so that it can come upwards because my desk is too high. So, but yeah, I can get it. I can get it really close.
Well, either way, let's try and do it right now. Put it right in front of you, like right here.
Like right there?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah, that does sound better. That's my ASMR voice right there. That's my recording meditation voice. That's so funny.
Yeah,
You're right,
you
100%.
need that one. Yeah, I was doing a coaching call just last week, and like, why are words dropping out when we're recording? We turn on studio sound, and it will do their mic. They send me a picture, and the microphone was like here. I've done it with another client, and I was like, why is your microphone like over here? And they're like, oh, I like it there, and I'm like, your sound is terrible. So that would be my biggest tip. That's all you need to do. As simple as that. Just have your microphone about a fist away. You got a dynamic microphone. It's going to pick up. Let me readjust
Yeah,
mine.
it's
I've
just
just
gonna
lost
pick
mine up.
me up instead of the world. Yeah. My dog's barking, my kid's screaming. Yeah, I can hear it
Yeah, I
better
mean,
in my headphones right now. That's just crazy. Yeah, you're right, 100%. Oh, that's so
well,
funny.
that me, I know what I'm talking about
Yeah.
too. When you mentioned that in the beginning, I was like, "Well, how's your microphone?" So I was like, "That's why I asked you, where is your microphone?" They couldn't even see it, and it looks great. You got such a good microphone, so even for the video, it's not covering your face, so it looks good as well. And then, so just to kind of wrap up as well, a couple of things that were great was I noticed that you and your co-host don't talk over each other, which is absolutely great. And I don't know if that's from editing because I know that can be fixed in editing, but when one person stopped, the other person started, which crosstalk for me is a big no-no. The other thing I was really impressed with, and this is something I do, but a lot of guests do, and I advise them against, was when one person was talking, you or the other, is Ashley, right? The other co-host weren't in the background going, yeah, There's nothing more frustrating when a guest or a host is the one making those agreeable noises in the background. And they can be cut out if you do multi-track editing, but it's more work. And so it just sounds terrible for the listener to hear that second person in the room, but you don't do that. So that was great. And then, I obviously didn't listen to every single minute of every episode, but going through it, I didn't really hear too many filler words like the and and like and so. Do you cut them out, or you're just naturally
It's
great
well,
speakers?
I've done so much video that I've really worked hard on saying what I need to say. So I don't take a lot of them out. I usually, when there's a birth story, the parents are and so a lot of times that gets shortened. But Ashley and I are professional teachers, so we're pretty good we clear our throats more than anything because we both have allergies. So that to me is the most obnoxious part because you can't you can't cut all of that out.
Well, you can if you do it separately. If you just make sure you take a pause, cough, and then restart, you can edit it out. But no, I was impressed with that. Yeah, I didn't. There was a couple of times I could notice there was a cut, because sometimes you notice it chops too close together, things like that. But other than that, like, yeah, the overall the content was great. Just needed to improve the
See,
quality of the audio and hearing that room sound.
you didn't know you needed to learn so much about vaginas. Look at that. Now you're going to be an expert if you keep listening.
Well, maybe I won't. No, I'm kidding. No. So I think going back to our original questions I asked you in the beginning, what are you recording with? You're using great equipment. So there's no updates or recommendations needed on that. You got the Shure, you got a 4K camera, you're using Descript, which is my recommendation. Anyone who listens knows I'm an affiliate. So go to the show notes, click my link. If you don't use Descript, then you'll be able to use Descript. I get a small commission, which is a win-win. For your podcast niche, the only thing I thought when you were answering that question is then you mentioned about spirituality, which I didn't see that when I was looking through your show notes and when I was looking through your description. And I don't know if maybe that's something you want to lean into more to separate yourself, to make it even more niche, that
And
makes you different.
I think when you listen, because we have so many recorded ahead of time. So, see, my brain is already on what we've already recorded and who we've had on. So, it is different in that when people listen, they're going to notice it's different. So, compared to regular, cut and dried, here's the physiology of birth, which can be very black and white, and ours is very nuanced. So, episodes coming up, I think they're going to hear that a little differently, but it's also our story. We come from different perspective of how we birthed our babies and what we've learned from that. So yeah, I don't know if that niche will show up in a different way. I think there's a little bit of woo here, and if you're not into woo, you're not going to be my person, and that's totally okay.
And so that might be then something that just maybe needs to be more upfront and clearer so that you are getting that niche. I love how you described that, but so you are getting those woo people instead of getting people that aren't woo, because then you might find your numbers fluctuate. Like if you want to get strong, loyal listeners, super fans, be like, this is what it is. This is what you're getting. And then those people will come. And I think the worst advice you can give to somebody, and I've had it before, is about the title of their podcast, because we're all so wedded to the title of our podcast. And my original podcast was called 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast, which went across against everything. And it was because I was just starting. 7 million bikes came because I just read an article about Saigon that there was over 7 million motorbikes for a city of only 9 or 10 million. So I thought it was quite quirky play on words, that. And then a Saigon podcast because it was about Saigon. But over time that developed, and I changed it back to just 3 words and became a Vietnam podcast because it became about Vietnam. And I dropped the 7 million bikes. And then I met with a business coach, and they were like, what does 7 million bikes mean? Like, we don't know. And I was like, oh, but it's quirky and it's funny. So, but then that evolved to be 7 Million Bikes podcast. So even though 7 million bikes might mean nothing to most people, that podcast means people know what it's about. So going back to yours, Birth Education Center podcast doesn't really tell me what it's about. I mean, it's about birth education, but it could be more, again, just trying to make it more niche. It could be more specific. And again, I'm taking advice from the greats, like, so Podcasting Business School. You might not need to change the podcast name or the artwork. What he advises, Adam Shibely, and I follow a lot of what he does, is just maybe adding on a few words. So on your title on Spotify, on your directory, so on Libsyn, so that it appears on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So it's not changing your brand. It's not changing your title. So for example, mine, I changed it Smarter Podcasting, Podcasting for Beginners.
So something like
podcasting.
So something like birth, postpartum, and the in between, or something like that, kind of like a tagline.
That's exactly it. That's what he calls it, a tagline at the end. Just so it's not changing your artwork, not changing your title. Essentially, it's just so people can read it when they're scanning on Spotify, scanning on Apple Podcasts. They see the Birth Education Center, but that could probably encompass so many things, right? Like how to find the nearest one near you, but that's not what you're doing. You're not teaching people how to find the nearest one. So just that tagline that just says exactly what the podcast does in just 2 or 3 words, so people scanning it can find it. And then now you start to notice how many other podcasts do it. Once I started doing it and I looked at other podcasts, I was like, oh, they do it too. That's why they do it. Yeah.
And that was one of the things I was like, I actually had 2 taglines, different taglines that were short and sweet. And then everybody was like, simplify, simplify, simplify. Don't even put podcast in your name because it's Birth Education Center. That's what they're going to be looking up is birth anyway. So yeah, it's hit or miss, right? So I'll try the tagline. I like the idea of having it on Spotify and Apple as they're scanning.
And that is another tip, to take away the word podcast, which you could, once you add the tagline, you could take away the word podcast, because, so I know mine goes against that because it's called a Vietnam podcast. So that's one of my many podcasts, but because it is, again, you've got such short real estate. Most people advise 2 to 3 words. 4 kind of gets cut off when you're scanning on podcast. And the big thing is people are already looking for podcasts. They're already in the podcast tab on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. So you're telling people something that they already know. They're like, yeah, I know it's the Birth Education Center podcast because I'm looking in the podcast tabs. So you could change it, Birth Education Center, and then what you described there.
Perfect.
So overall, I think it's great. I mean, you can tell you've done your research, obviously from talking to you, but just from listening to it as well. I think there's just a couple of small technical things that could be changed and improved.
Yeah, like the microphone, like the most important thing. Yeah, that could be improved. You're right, 100%. I'm going to be buying a new desk this week. That's what I'm going to be doing, buying a new desk.
Well, I think your microphone fits perfectly what you've got it right now.
Well, yeah, it's sitting on my lap.
Right now?
No, it's sitting on
Oh, it's on your lap. It's on your lap. Yeah, so I use a boom arm. So you can boom arm like for $10. I looked on Amazon, and if it fits on your desk, those boom arms are pretty good. They take up so little space. But yeah, I mean, don't feel the microphone things. As I said, so many different people do the same things. I've seen the microphone in so many different places, but especially now because you have headphones on is great. So I didn't used to wear headphones. Other people don't wear headphones, but you have them on, and as soon as you change the mic, you're like, oh yeah, this is totally different. So that's why it's good that you're already wearing headphones, because you can hear that difference.
Definitely. Yeah, I appreciate the yeah, you don't know what you don't know, right? So definitely need to do that.
Well, thank you very much for being on only the second ever podcast audit. We did a coaching call last week as well, which should be up on YouTube. And I tell people don't go to YouTube, but this won't be on an audio podcast because I shared my screen with you a lot, and so it doesn't really work for a podcast.
Yeah,
So
but
it probably will only be on YouTube.
But that coaching call was amazing, and I'm going to actually be calling you again because I have more questions for you. But I really needed that, and you explained things wonderfully, and it made sense to me. And there were just pieces missing with the script that I couldn't figure out after watching every single episode that they had on 101, etc. And I'm like, but I have questions still. So yeah, I really appreciate it. It was affordable. It was well worth my time. So yeah, get a coaching call from Neil. He's great.
Thank you. Yes, if you do want to book a coaching call, they're $40 an hour. And it's funny because I use the script all day, every day. And I didn't realize how much I know, how many little nuances, how many little buttons. And I've been doing a lot of these coaching calls now, and it's been the same every time. What you just said, I watched 7 hours of tutorials, and what you told me in an hour is like, it was more than 7 hours of watching YouTube tutorials. So it will save you time, and time is money. So if you do want to book a coaching call, get in touch. Or if you want to do a podcast audit as well, send me your podcast, get in touch, and I will have a listen, take some notes, and then we'll record an episode. So, Care, thank you very much. If you are having a baby or thinking of having a baby in the US, because it's very specific to the US, go and check out Birth Education Center podcast, but that name may be changing soon. But look up Birth Education Center podcast, turn on the notifications, follow it. I'll tell you to do it so Care doesn't have to. And Care, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, a highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.